everyone, welcome to another video. Before we get started, I need to say a huge thank you because I've now hit over 500 subscribers. That was one of my goals for the year, and the fact that you guys have supported me and subscribed really does mean a lot, because it is something that I do sort of after my normal job, and so it can get kind of hard to manage my time, and also I start to feel like the videos that I'm putting out are not great and generally just full of self-doubt. So thank you so much for subscribing and supporting me, because it does give me a boost. Big shout outs today go to Joe Zinger, to Hackney and Tower Hamlets Media Education, to Blessing Akani, to Cherry Mandy Cand, to Nina R, to Hushki Gaming and Liam Phillips, and to Lil ZZ as well. Thank you so much for subscribing. I know it's been a while since I've released a video. Today what we're going to do is have a look at TLC still, but we're going to break them down into the key concepts like we have with other musicians. So starting off with the key concepts of language, industry, media and representation. Sorry, audience and representation. Starting off with the language, obviously language is something that we discussed, media language, we discussed in the case study video that I did last time. It wasn't last week, last time. Basically the video is made up of a lot of contrasts, so contrast between the natural world and the things that are happening in the narratives, contrast between what we would expect to see in a video and what we're faced with, contrast between sort of men and women, light and dark. So we have a lot of sort of binary opposition and contrasting within the video itself. We also get the use of time featured throughout the whole of the video, not only through the images of the clocks, but also where we see sort of fast forwards to what might happen to the characters in the future, and also then the repercussions of the actions and events that happen within the video itself. We do have a variety of camera shots throughout the video itself, because we're flicking back and forth between the narratives and then the group themselves. And we also have sort of what you'd class as special effects. I know that today we'd look at it and we would perhaps critique them and think that they weren't fantastic, but for the 90s they were very, very good. So that includes things like the translucent mother and son to show that they are a spirit or a conscience, and also the water imagery throughout, not only the water itself, but the water image of the group when they're sort of silhouetted in water. In terms of industry, the song was released in 1994. It was from their second album, which was called Crazy Sexy Cool. It's now considered a signature song for the band, but actually TLC were not all that supported in terms of releasing it and recording it as a music video. Despite that, it did spend 7 weeks at #1. It won 4 MTV Music Video Awards, including Video of the Year as well. So it became quite a pivotal song and quite an important video, which is probably the reason why it's been put onto the specification. Now, in terms of the audience, this was kind of tricky to work out, because although TLC are still active today, they don't have as big a following as they did back in the 90s, and particularly after Lisa Lopez passed away, there wasn't as much in terms of how prevalent they were or how on the scene they were in terms of media. So the primary audience are likely to be 30 to 50-year-old women, because these will be the original audience of TLC now grown. Because they're in their 30s to 50s, they're likely to be higher up that ABC scale. They may still be aspirers. They may also be resigned, depending on the background or culture that they've come from as well, because one of the reasons that TLC were as big as they were was that they were quite underrepresented, and they sort of were a face for very underrepresented communities. Secondary audience likely to be 18 to 25-year-old women, and obviously when TLC were in their prime, they would have been targeting the 18 to 25-year-old audience. Likely to be lower down on the ABC scale, still likely to be aspirers. Now, in terms of representation, the song is very socially conscious. It represents the illegal drug trade, street violence, HIV and AIDS. It's also praised for the commentary that it had on or the commentary that it gave on the impact that street violence had on the lives of young black men. Actually, if you go to the Wikipedia page for the song, there is a fantastic quote on there about how sort of socially aware the band were, and how this was a commentary that hadn't really been put out there, or an area that hadn't really been explored to a great extent within the music industry. Now thinking about our context then, obviously context can be split down into these 4 different areas. Political context, again, is not massively important here. I like to think that political context focuses more on newspapers just because it sort of fits with newspapers more, but it is still something that you need to be aware of. Starting off with the social context, HIV and AIDS, in the 90s, they were not commonly spoken about within society. It's definitely not the case like it is today, where we have so much awareness and so much support available to people with HIV or AIDS, and also education around HIV and AIDS. Now, although the myths behind how HIV was contracted had been dispelled, many still held on to the prejudices that surrounded this illness, and so it wasn't spoken about, and it was considered to be quite a taboo subject. Violence and promiscuity were also issues at the time, again not talked about, and particularly in the video, the idea that the woman is promiscuous, that's something that wasn't necessarily talked about, and it sort of created this more equal representation of how these issues could affect literally anyone. TLC themselves as a group often considered to be disadvantaged because they subverted the stereotype for girl groups. Girl groups in the 90s were very sort of overly feminine and really quite sort of, I don't quite know how to phrase it, they were sort of portrayed as sort of good and good girls and that sort of thing, whereas TLC were a little bit edgier, partly because of the genre that they fit into, but also just their general representation and the things they spoke about. They were considered to be quite unladylike and unfeminine, and so they were sort of setting themselves aside from all the other girl groups at the time. Now, cultural context, one of the band members has gone sort of on the record to say that the video is in part inspired by a film called The Abyss. Again, street violence, very prevalent among the young black male community at the time that the song was recorded and released. And so partly the characters and the actors have been chosen specifically in that sense to represent this issue within society. But the band themselves, again, have gone on the record to say that their song, their video, their music, it has no colour attached to it, and that the emotions and the issues that are faced within the video are faced by anybody. The love between a mother and a son is something that affects everybody. The fact that, anybody can be affected by one mistake or one lack of thought in terms of sex and relationships, that can happen to anyone. Historically, this song was the first #1 single to mention HIV and AIDS. The song initially wasn't well received on radio, and so many of the band's management were reluctant to do a video for the song, and so the band really had to push for this and sort of had to really campaign to get the video made. In terms of when and how it was written, Lisa Lopez actually wrote the song while she was in a halfway house, and so again, this idea of not chasing unachievable goals or unachievable dreams might well have stemmed from some of the experiences that she had there. Politically, again, as I said, political context, not too much of an issue here, but it is worthwhile bearing in mind. And it does raise some questions that you might want to have a think about in more detail as part of your revision and also part of your research if you're using this song or you're doing this song for your exam. In the UK, the Conservatives were in power with John Major. Now, the Conservatives being in power could cause the song to be sort of repressed from society because Conservatives tend to be more traditional and issues like this are not always spoken about within society. But equally, because that's the case, it might mean that the song becomes more of a talking point because nobody else is talking about it. In the USA, Clinton was president at the time, which means the Democrats were in power, and often Democrats are seen as sort of promoting social justice and advancing social justice, and so that might be another reason why the song gained as much traction as it did. And it would be interesting to consider whether or not political context affects the songs by thinking about how well it may or may not have been received if it was released again today, if the band decided to re-release it, or if they had decided to re-release it, for instance, when Obama was president. So there's a lot of interesting things that you can consider with political context. They may not be relevant to your exam, but it is useful to bear in mind anyway. Hopefully that's all made sense. There are a few key terms today, although not so many, because we are looking at the key concepts rather than analysing the video as a whole. If you do have any questions, comments, ideas, suggestions, pop them in the comments box below. Do please subscribe to the channel. If you hit the box below and you subscribe, you get a shout out in the next video. If you have subscribed but haven't had one, then let me know in the comments section below or through social media at media_revision for Twitter or GCSE Media Revision for Instagram. And I will see you guys later for another video.